In the future, there's only two kinds of jobs where the computer tells you what to do, and jobs where you tell the computer what to do.
Is the next 2 to 3 year outlook before we adapt chaos?
It's horrible, and it keeps getting worse.
Don't take definitive actions or represent yourself with AI-generated stuff.
It's making stuff up, and it's magnifying biases.
It's very important and very helpful to everyone to explain out loud how the decision is going to be made and who's going to make it.
If you're not hearing back from companies, it is not the ATS's fault.
Welcome to episode 4 of 3Course Founders, where we have deeper conversations with entrepreneurs who are building the future. And today I'm chatting with my friend Daniel Chait. He is the founder and CEO of Greenhouse. It's an end-to-end hiring platform, and at its core is what you might know as an applicant tracking system or an ATS. And so you're going to hear 3 fantastic courses of conversation where Daniel and I talk about what he knows about great leaders and great recruiting, the impact of AI both in the short and long term for job search and hiring, and a ton more about the sticky stuff of the founder journey. And with that, please enjoy.
Daniel Chait, welcome. CEO, founder of Greenhouse, here in New York City, where both of our companies are based, for 3Course Founders, our podcast all about diving deeper fundamental level, saying things that other startup founders aren't saying in every other interview that's happening across the podcast sphere, if we might call it that. But so excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversations.
Yeah, and one of the things I'll tell you that I think I'm particularly excited about, we've had a lot of conversations about this space over the years. We are in the same industry, talent, hiring, recruiting, job search. And whenever we do have conversations together, I always walk away feeling like it was a little bit deeper than other CEOs in our space are willing to go. I think maybe we're a little bit more opinionated than others is one element of it. But the other is like I feel like we've had a view of this over several phases of what recruiting software has looked like, of what practices in tech have looked like in particular. And so it's always a good conversation. So let's dive in. The first segment of 3Course Founders, the first course is always market insight. We always think about, okay, what has a founder learned along the way that not only people building in their exact space would learn from, but in the adjacent spaces in the industry at large. So in all the years building Greenhouse, what's the market insight that you think people would find valuable?
That's a great question. So at Greenhouse, we say that our mission is to help every company become great at hiring. And you say that enough times, and then people start asking, what does it actually mean to be great at hiring? And how do you do it? And so that's probably the thing we spent the most time thinking about. And what I would say is, having done a ton of research and many studies across thousands of companies, looking for the answer to that very question, what is it that companies can do to get better at hiring? It turns out the answer is both very simple and very profound, which is to say, it's about leadership behavior. It's not about your recruiters. It's not about your careers page. It's not about the software you use. I hate to say that. What it is the difference between companies where hiring is a true competitive advantage and everyone else. It comes down to, do the leaders themselves personally engage in hiring and take a leadership role over that? When they do that, everything else works better.
Well, they have to recognize it as part of that, right? That's the key part, because it can be a competitive advantage, or it is probably a competitive advantage for everybody, but some CEOs take it for granted. Some executive teams don't think of it as the thing that's causing their success, right? I always think about this in our context of agency, think about talent. I tell people that the hard part about knowing whether a team is good at recruiting is there's no real easy way to mark attribution in this space. Like, did somebody join Stripe because of the Collison brothers, or because they probably have a great recruiting team? Both are true to some extent, but you don't know, and you can't really directly attribute all of this stuff to one motion or the other.
So it turns out that there actually are very specific behaviors that those leaders do that others don't. And so that was really the question that we had, was like, what is the difference between these companies where things work and everyone else? And when we honed in on the leadership behavior, what we saw was that I would talk to an executive at a company where hiring was working really well. And I would say, tell me about hiring. And he would say, well, I spend more than 50% of my time on hiring. And in turn, I hold my leaders accountable that they should do the same.
Right.
And when you talk to other companies, say, tell me about hiring your company, they say, yeah, I don't know, my HR person isn't sending over the right candidates. It's really annoying.
And what have you done about it, right?
What is your job in this? Like, yeah, I yell at my HR person. They don't send over the candidates. You're like, yeah, that's not going to work. So there are very specific things. Like, it's not magic. The good news is anyone can do the same things and get the same results. The depressing news is like very few people do them. So part of our mission is I keep telling people, here's the formula, here's the playbook, and if you follow it, it actually does work.
It's almost like a customer education about fundamental team building, right? It's not as much about recruiting process in this case. It's how involved you're getting in recruiting process, obviously. But in some ways, what you're saying is like, let me help you understand, or you're saying what you came to understand is if the CEO understands team building is the exercise, then it goes a lot better. But here's the interesting thing. There's like a controversial thing that happens on Twitter maybe every 3 months where some CEO will say something like, I try to pay attention in the end loop on every hire we're making, or that was what they did up until, let's say, hire 500. And then a bunch of people yell at them about like, that seems micromanagey, that's unreasonable, that's not scalable. Why do you think you as the CEO have profound insights? And they'll even say this about, kind of really successful companies. What do you think about the tension there of like, it sounds aligned with what you're saying, which is that person who's maniacal about hiring is probably doing at least the more right thing, if not the right thing, compared to someone who is very hands-off. And yet people's native reaction is to think of that as like the exact opposite right thing to do as a leader.
A lot of unpacking there.
Yeah, that was a big one.
I think there's a bunch of ways that can play out. Some really good, some really not. So if you think about this leadership behavior of being involved in hiring, we gave it a name because if it doesn't have a name, no one can talk about it. So we call it talent makers. Actually wrote a book called Talent Makers, which really explains all this stuff. And what a talent maker does, we break it down. There's kind of 3 main groups of stakeholders you have as a leader when it comes to hiring. You have your recruiting team that you partner with. You have your organization that you lead, and you have the candidates and prospects that you're trying to hire. And as a leader, you have a specific and very important role to play with respect to each of those parties. And so getting back to your question, if I'm a talent maker and I'm working with candidates, you can do that in productive ways or you can do that in harmful ways. And so if you're just like dropping in at the end of the process and being like, I'm smarter than my team, I'm going to really say what's what, you can really create a lot of problems.
But if you have a theory of the world that you can like very meaningfully apply at the end.
You got it. And so those leaders who are very directly and personally involved with candidates make a big impact, but in very specific ways. And the way is not, I'm going to substitute my judgment for the collective judgment of an organized team making smart decisions using data, right? It's the old saying, like, if we have data, let's look at the data. If all we have are opinions, let's use mine. Terrible way to make decisions, right? So like, let's use the data to make the decisions. But how can you have impact as a leader with candidates? I would say the number one thing by far, reach out to candidates yourself.
Without the process, like not the recruiter introducing you, not the, oh, this is the last call before the final. It's kind of like, they're in the middle of your loop.
No.
Oh, okay.
Before that.
Oh, you're talking about sourcing side.
You got it.
This.
So you've got a whole universe out there of people that don't know about your company and don't care.
Yeah.
That could be amazing for your organization. And they're not applying on your website.
Yep.
And if they are, they're probably getting lost in the shuffle. What you can do that no one else in your organization can do if you're a leader is you can send them an unsolicited email. I do this all the time. Hey, my name is Daniel. I run this company called Greenhouse. I've got an opening on my team. Here it is. It's really important to me to find great people. You seem interesting. Can we talk for 10 minutes?
Low stakes as a beginning.
So I send out hundreds of those emails when I get a job opening to people that I choose. I get about 85 or 90% open the email. More than half respond, and I get a meeting with about a quarter of them.
You're utilizing your ability to look more interesting to that prospect. You're starting to form ideal attributes based off the people you're picking that your team can also later use as part of their sourcing diligence. And at the end of the day, these are probably a lot, I'm going to guess, long-term hires eventually, right? It doesn't need to be that happens that day, but it might be a long-term conversation.
And let's get real. They open my email because my title says CEO. It's not something I'm...
We're overrated, but people do. It's just so true.
It's not because I'm such a great writer. But they open my emails. And so like, that's a great power that our company has. And so I want to use that power to its greatest advantage. So that at the top of the funnel, leaders have this amazing opportunity that really no one else in the company has to get the attention of interested prospects, whatever. As you get through that interviewing and selection process, I think that's where you can get into a little bit of the dynamic you were highlighting of substituting the judgment of people that have more status in the organization for people that have more insight into that hire. Let the team do the job. Let the team do the thinking. But then again, at the end of the process, that's again where leaders can really pick it up and say, hey, don't just hand it over to your recruiting team to say, okay, close this candidate, they're my favorite, fetch, right? That's like a very hands-off approach. It's like, no, you've invested a lot of time. You found the candidate you want to get. Let's go win that person.
Marketing
leadership comes back in and say, hey, We put a lot of time into meeting with you. I just want you to know our team thinks you're amazing. We found some great growth opportunities for you in this role, but I also think it's a wonderful fit. I'd be really excited if we had the opportunity to work together. Let me know if you have any questions.
We care.
We care. And if they get that message from you as the manager or from other leaders that they've gotten to meet, like that is 1 in 100. They do not get that message from anyone else. Again, it's a simple thing you can do that very few companies do that really makes a big impact on those candidates.
If we zoom back to just thinking about the mess of hiring processes that we're talking about here, the other portion of this that's really interesting right now that you and I have talked a lot about is AI in hiring, and how it's going to make the problems of bad hires even worse. Good hires are going to have their own challenges. And then there's also the relationship candidates have to the process. Let me start with this. Like, what are you most afraid of in this phase? Because I'm afraid of a lot of things in this phase.
Exactly.
What do you think about most?
I think the way you said it, I like it's a phase. And I think the technology is evolving really quickly. Society is responding really quickly. So like a lot of this stuff is going to be different over time.
We'll adapt.
For now, I think where we are is people have seen the great promise of AI to do a lot of things that we do that are time consuming, manual, and that the computer could just do very quickly. So I read an article recently where a certain category of legal work that lawyers do, reviewing contracts and looking for key terms, they trained a machine model on, and the machine model did it 99% faster, and 99.7% as accurate.
Right.
Like that's just a way. Like, just do it, right?
Yeah.
No one's going to read the contracts as accurately or as quickly as that, but ever. That's a done deal. So people see that and they go, "Oh, I spent all this time on hiring. Can't I just hand it over to a chatbot and let it solve the problem for me?" And you're like, hang on. So the other thing that AI of this generation in this day and age is doing is it's making stuff up. And it's magnifying biases. And so you better be really thoughtful about the role you give it. And what you do not want to do with today's technology is put it in the role of making decisions about who to hire and who not to. So to me, that's a bright, clear line. I like how
definitive that is,
I mean, it's a bright, clear line. If it's making decisions for you, it's creating big problems for you. It's creating legal risk. It's missing big talent. It's potentially creating huge brand problems for you because these technologies have been shown to magnify a lot of the inequities, errors in judgment, and decision problems that are inherent in the data set that powers them to begin with. And so they will overfit the data. If it thinks that the best person to fill an investment banker job is a white guy in a blue blazer, it's going to find you all the white guys in blue blazers and put them in front of the line. And then you're going to miss out on huge talent. You're going to be exposed to legal risk. By the way, there's laws all over the world, even in locals here in New York. There's a law around the use of algorithms. And so now you're subjecting yourself to additional legislation. 100%. It's a place you don't want to be. Okay, so that's where I'm most afraid. I'm hoping you're going to ask the other side of the question.
Which is like I'm even going to pause it before I ask the others. Well, I'm not going to get to that yet, actually. I'm going to share where I'm most afraid as a compliment, and then let's get to the other side of the question. The candidate has the exact same set of problems or worries that I would give them. You know, we sit kind of on the not opposite sides of the table, but we sit with different stakeholders. And we sit with talent where I tell people commonly, you can use ChatGPT to brainstorm. You should use it to kind of, if you're stuck on, I can't express something a certain way, but I tell them never copy paste out of it for a resume, a cover letter, an interview answer. I tell it it's a great kind of starter to a brainstorm, but it's not an interview coach. And to your point about never make a decision with, AI or don't use AI to make a decision hiring. I tell candidates all the time, don't apply or take, I haven't articulated it as clearly as you have there, but it's like, don't take definitive actions or represent yourself with AI generated stuff.
That's right.
And that to me is like 90% of what we're going to see over the next 3 years is people going, isn't this just going to be easier, get me better jobs? No, you're going to miss opportunities. You're going to misrepresent yourself. You're going to say things you don't mean. You're not going to be differentiated because you're going to sound the same. Totally. How do you feel about the candidate side?
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with you 100%. Think of it like a really hardworking and kind of sloppy assistant, like probably doing drugs. So like they'll crank stuff out for you. Like most of it'll be okay, and every once in a while you'll be like, what? And you have to be the editor. I mean, you have to take it as like input and a starting point. And for some cases, that's amazing, man. I panic at a blank page. So if I'm asked to write something and I'm looking at a blank screen, like I may as well just take the day off.
Totally.
But I'll often just throw like a bunch of noise at GPT and let it start the page for me. And then I can edit and be like, oh, that's right, that's wrong. It's very easy. So that's—
And using it the opposite, I'll often have something where I go, did I miss anything? Let's say I'm sending an email and I'm like, okay, did I make all the points I wanted to make? Or if I'm brainstorming on like a name of something, hey, here's where I'm going for stylistically in 3 ideas, brainstorm with me.
You got it. Totally. And so it's great, like input. It's great, to put something new into the mix. And it's great for repetition in large texts or other kinds of capacities. But again, if you're a candidate and you're thinking, I'm going to apply for a job and I'm just going to stick my resume in and then have it go like automatically apply to a bunch of jobs on my behalf, which by the way, there are tools out there that do that. You may find yourself in some sticky situations.
I mean,
you don't know what it's going to say about you.
The logistical and supply chain problems we're creating here of like candidates are going to use AI, companies are going to then say, I need to use AI to solve how many AI generated applications I'm getting. And I was sharing with you, I saw a tweet earlier that was perfect around this of like a recruiter using AI and a candidate using AI are going to have a meeting where someone's going to say, this meeting could have just been an API call. Like, we're just going to get programmatic about it.
It's literally happening.
That's bad for everybody.
It's horrible. And it keeps getting worse. It's literally happening. Candidate volumes are going up and up. And so candidates are trying to get ahead of the noise. They're like, oh my gosh, there's so many people applying for these jobs. I'm going to automate it with these tools.
Yeah.
Which makes it go up and up even more.
Right.
And then the companies are turning around and going like, there's so many applications. I had a customer email me yesterday and say, I open up a job and by the next day I have 1,000 applicants in my pool. I need help with some strategies to sort that out. So like they want to use AI to filter it back down. You're like, well, these people are using AI to magnify it and these people want to use AI to shrink it back down. Surely there's a better way.
Let's truth tell for a moment. Let me first set the context. You are the founder and CEO of the current most modern, relevant, and important applicant tracking system in the market. You have the customers that matter, the modern customers. You have some of the legacy and enterprise customers. You're often the choice for early stage teams. And so if you're going to help me tell the world the truth that sometimes they don't believe me on, I think this is the moment we can do it.
Let's do it.
Keyword matching in applicant processes. Every candidate at some point goes, I have to keyword match and someone told me to stuff words in for the ATS, and whether they do it in the white space or they're just really concerned with every single word in their resume. Is keyword filtering and keyword matching at the front end of application processes a real thing?
I'm here to tell you, if you're not hearing back from companies, it is not the ATS's fault.
He said it. I mean, it's just so unbelievable that like recruiters have essentially, I think because they like to hear themselves talk, you tell me if that's why you think it happens, but like proliferated this myth, because I think it does come from professionals in the industry, but I don't know where the genesis is.
So again, I hear it a lot from applicants, and I have a lot of empathy because the truth of the matter is you apply to a job, most of what happens is you don't hear back. Yeah. That's the sad state of the world today is like tons and tons of people are applying to jobs every day.
Hiring is hard.
Crickets, they're getting ghosted.
Yeah.
And so, you think, I work hard, I put my heart and soul into this, applying for this job. I'm great at it. I read their website. I've watched a bunch of their, this is the job for me. And you push that apply button and you don't hear back. Something must be wrong. And so you tell yourself some stories. You try to think about it.
Reasonably, you're trying to explain the world.
And so I have a lot of empathy for that. And the fact that your average job seeker out there doesn't know or care what an ATS is entirely appropriate. Let's just be clear.
Yeah, totally.
No one should really have to think about that. Yeah. So they think, well, maybe there's a computer system behind the scenes that I need to somehow game, or that's using some fancy math and ruling me out for some mysterious reason. And so they come up with this theory, well, maybe it's because there's certain words that the computer vision is trying to track. And so we heard people say, I'm going to put a bunch of keywords in there in white on white text. Yep. So that way the people don't think you're a crazy person, but the computer sees those keywords. None of that is actually what's going to get you ahead. What's going to get you ahead is carefully applying to relevant, meaningful jobs and using what tools you can, using what capabilities you can muster to try to build a relationship with someone at the company. Yeah. Try to find an in with a manager, get an informational interview, go to some of their events, really get to know the place.
The other myth that I'd love to know, actually, you and I have never talked about this too, is I do agree that people who are looking to get a result should do the active effort of trying to meet somebody, et cetera. But applications are also underrated. So I remember, now we're in the space of concierge services for talent, but before that, I've built product for companies, for talent, integrating with every ATS on the planet, et cetera. And, I don't have aggregate data on this, but I feel because it's different per company, But every company that I've looked at, and I've worked with a variety of them on the back end of this, it wasn't true that the referral rate to hire was just like 40% of how they hired. It was more like, actually, applications can be responsible for 60 to 80% of company hiring. Referrals are probably something like 5 to 15% depending on the company. But recruiters will come out and say, you need a referral. And hiring managers or candidates who become coaches will say, you need a referral.
Yeah.
What's your thought on the referral myth?
So referrals are a bit of a two-edged sword.
Yeah.
From the company's perspective, on the one hand, they genuinely tend to be very good in the sense of they're efficient.
Yeah.
And there's a higher percentage of referrals end up getting hired.
Yeah.
And they tend to stick around and be at the company for a long time.
Yeah.
So they tend to be like seen as a good fit for the organization. And they tend to be low volume.
Right.
And they tend to reinforce existing demographic makeup, and so counter any diversity that you're trying to build.
Yeah.
And so it's a double-edged sword because you're solving one problem
something else,
and you're creating other problems. And so you need to be thoughtful about it. I think employer referral programs are great. They definitely have a place.
But they don't happen as much as people think, right? Like candidates who think
they're
that
not going to be high volume. No one's going to solve 90% of their hiring problem with referrals.
Right.
It's not a thing.
Why do people think that? Why do recruiters proliferate that myth? That's what frustrates me. It's like recruiters will come out and be like, you need a referral, you need a referral. And I go, a referral is great if you can get it and if you're relevant and if everything lines up. Of course, do it. But by the way, the job application is underrated.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think the reason is because when you look at the referral itself, it is efficient.
So it feels good. That's what you're saying. Okay,
if you happen to be one of them, but it's just very low volume.
Yeah.
So it's just not that frequent. It's not that common. But if you can do it, great. But I don't think it's going to solve all your problems.
So is AI going to, we'll get to the good part, but in the short term, is it going to destroy every process known to, like, how do we think about, okay, tons of AI generated applications, tons of companies coming to you or finding an alternate like add-on to Greenhouse to like filter through applications. The supply chain is going to get messy. Is the next 2 to 3 year outlook before we adapt chaos?
I think so. I think there's a lot of chaos now in a lot of ways. So people are trying all kinds of solutions, which is good. And people on both sides are trying to figure out where's it headed and be where it's going next. And also, like, every vendor is trying on some AI stuff because their investors are telling them to, and because you get PR for it. And they're figuring out how to charge for it. It's kind of the Wild West. So you can say like, oh, we've got our new AI module. Here's the package. Right. And like customers have some money for it. So there's a lot. So the good news about all that is there's a ton of ideas. There's a ton of experimentation. And the market is kind of collectively figuring out where's this all going to go. The downside is like a lot of it's not going to go anywhere. A lot of it's actually creating problems along the way. And so that's where you just have to be really careful about, are you in a place where you're going to take responsible steps to take advantage of the technology without going to a place where you're creating legal or reputational problems for your company.
So talking about that and taking those steps, what does 2030's version look like? The ideal scenario that we're going to reach responsible AI in hiring. Do you have a sense of the shape of it?
Well, again, so I start at the beginning. Our mission is to help every company be great at hiring. What is great at hiring? You want to find exactly the right person, exactly when you need them, with as little time and money as possible. So when I look at all the behavior of what our customers do, thousands and thousands of hiring managers every single day, most of what they do, almost all of what they do, could be done better.
Right.
So just think about what happens when you go to hire someone. Let's start at the very beginning. You and I sit down where you're my recruiter, I'm a hiring manager. We talk about the job. What are we going to call it?
Yep.
Oh, senior Java programmer, senior Java engineer, mid-level programmer.
Should the hyphen be in front end or no hyphen in front end?
Back-end engineer, full stack engineer. Like we could have a whole like just on that. And then you're like, okay, what should the job description say? Yep. And then who's going to do which interview and which interviews are going to do in which order and when are we going to do them? And then how are we going to evaluate candidates and what's on those scorecards? And then what should we offer that person? What are the salary ranges and where are we going to locate that talent? And who's the manager going to be? And then is this the candidate I want to offer or that the candidate? What should I offer them that'll be fair and that'll be likely to be accepted? And how should I onboard them? So from the very, very beginning of an idea of someone you want to hire, all the way through the moment that you actually get someone, everyone on the team is making decisions all the time. Yeah. Almost all of those decisions are very unconsidered. Yeah. They're off the cuff. They're using a lot of folklore, and this is the way we've always done it. And I think could be improved with some intelligence. So I think the future vision is that all of that stuff is done in the most intelligent and data-driven ways possible.
When everyone is using really good, that does sound like a great place to be in. When everyone's using really good tools, this is a problem in every industry, so not just recruiting, but I'm curious if you have a thought on it. Does our ability to differentiate get really weird? Whether we're candidates receiving emails or going through interviews, or whether we're interviewers hearing the same academic right answers from candidates, do we start to lose the ability to differentiate between people, companies, opportunities?
I don't think so. I mean, I see what you're saying, but I think just the fact that everyone's using the same tools doesn't necessarily mean everyone's going to have the same content.
Judgment, yeah.
Right? After all, you and I are probably both using Google Docs.
Right.
But we're writing different stuff, right? So
actually, I just copy paste everything. You're right.
So similarly, I think, people still, there's a lot of differentiation in what my company does and how I think we're special and how I think, and truly that actually gets at the heart of where this is all headed, which is the things that are time consuming but not unique to you, the computer should do. Yeah. And the things that are unique to you, you should do. It was said once, I think, in the future, there's only two kinds of jobs where the computer tells you what to do, and jobs where you tell the computer what to do.
This was a good segment 1. Good stuff. Let's go grab some food.
Let's go eat.
Let's do it. So, Daniel, course 2, here with our friends at Sagaponic, which is in Flatiron, Manhattan, a place that you haven't been to yet. This is your first time, but you've had a fry.
First time, it's true.
It's a delicious spot. I've been several times with my team, with my family and friends. I will tell you, it becomes addicting. And the service here, top notch.
It looks fantastic.
We're ready to dig in.
Can't wait. And awesome. The conversation is supposed to be even better.
That is the thing that we have to do. We have to make it. The food is the appearance. Uh-huh. Our voices are the cherry on top.
Perfect.
Let's do it. So, course 2 of 3-Course Founders is all about what I call mutual founder therapy, which is what are the things that founders experience that if people heard more about them would give people a sense of what's difficult, not for everybody, or not at the early stage that everybody experiences, but that gets to the nuance. So as I begin to eat very selfishly in front of you, you start to tell me what's the thing that people really need to hear.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so, I mean, first, let me just say, I have a great job. I feel very fortunate. And one of my pet peeves is when founders go like, oh, if you only knew how hard it was, whatever. It's like, no, come on. This is a fantastic job. So I just want to be clear, I think I have an excellent job. I feel extremely fortunate to get to do what I do. But that's not to say that there aren't difficult parts of it. And there aren't parts that require your best effort and your best work and a lot of learning, a lot of growth. Mm-hmm. For me, as simple as it sounds, communication with a growing team, especially with a distributed team now, becomes increasingly difficult because, there's always a difference between what you say and what someone hears. Mm-hmm. And in a one-on-one high trust environment, you have the opportunity to kind of get past some of that stuff. When you're in my shoes and I have to give a presentation through Zoom to 600 people in 5 different time zones on 2 continents and hope that they all get exactly what I want out of that conversation is very, very difficult. And so it takes it takes a lot of prep. It takes a lot of skill and a lot of intentionality to get across what you're trying to get across to the people who need to hear it.
I love that this is the topic because I do feel the mutual portion of this is going to be, kind of key. I think it's not just the remote environment, which made it even harder. It's the way in which work is shifting, and both of us obviously are in the talent space as a utility, not to get into the, kind of emotions of what work means though. And that's really changed for people, I feel like, since about 2019, 2020, COVID, obviously. And so the job of the founder got weird, first of all, for a little bit there when tech was everything, money was everywhere. And so everything was, about how much people could grab. Yep. Founders included, VCs included. Yep. And during that time, communicating became not only challenging, but even almost antagonistic. Everybody's kind of looking out for themselves. Now, though, there's this societal problem of what's our relationship to our job? Yeah. What does it need to be? What am I owed as an individual? What am I owed as a company? Who's an employer? What does capitalism mean? Obviously, major questions. But then drilling down to like, okay, then as a CEO, what do I say? Becomes really difficult, because the other thing I heard you talking about the 600 people on a Zoom, every one of them might need a different version of a message over time and a different nuance.
You got it.
What is your thing so far in terms of being able to, as a founder, understand that you might have a universal message or mission, and everyone can probably hear that repeated to them and get that. That's the advice that everyone gives as a founder: repeat yourself, repeat yourself. But there's stuff that can't be repeated because it has that nuance of certain people need to hear it. Certain people might not want to hear it.
Yeah.
What do you do there?
I don't have the answer. But I have a few things maybe to say. It's a great question. One thing I'll say is you don't have to do it all.
Right.
And I think there's a temptation or a fear that you have to do. You're the CEO, you're the founder, or you're the leader, whatever level. It's your job, to give the message and to say the things. And I think if you can limit that in certain ways and open up yourself to other people doing a lot of the communication, then you can get somewhere with those people together. So I'll give you an example. Some things, as you said, I like to say I'm the CRO, the Chief Repetition Officer.
Which, by the way, is a skill by itself that I, for example, don't feel I have. So kudos to you to like having it.
It takes work. But like if you ask anyone in the company, what's our mission? Everybody will say the same thing. Everybody will say Greenhouse's mission is to help every company in the world become great at hiring, because we drill it over and over and over again.
Right.
There's other things that take a lot more nuance. And let's say we're trying to have a conversation within the organization about, the strategy or why we're making certain decisions. I can give some headlines, but there's implications for everyone in the company that are very different. What that strategy means for you, if you're a mid-market sales rep versus a software engineer versus an administrative assistant, right? You need to hear very different things. Those messages and those conversations can happen in small group levels. Right. And so we arm our managers and we do like these messaging cascades where it's like, here's what these people need to hear. Let's go talk to our managers. The key thing of that though, and this is the second point I was going to make, is communication is a two-way street.
Right.
And I think if you just say, okay, here's what I'm going to tell those people, here's what I'm going to tell those people, here's what I'm going to tell those people, you're missing something essential and you risk stepping in it. And so the way we do those cascades is like, I'll go tell this group of people, call it our senior leadership team, and I'll say, here's the thing I want to get across to the company. When you hear that, what doesn't land?
Right.
What questions do you need to be prepared for that your team is going to ask you?
Right.
And by asking those two questions, then you really get somewhere, because then they'll tell you, oh, I totally get what you're saying. But if I roll that out to my team, they're going to have this, that, the other question. And then we can talk about the answer. So like, you really want to over prepare everyone who's going to be participating in a conversation like that, so that they don't step into something that they're not prepared for.
If you don't mind sharing, I'd love to hear about a time when that like went murderously wrong for you as a CEO.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, it's like, you make a lot of mistakes doing what I do. Look, I think, again, in the position that I'm in, you make decisions that affect a lot of people's lives. You're talking about issues of pay and issues of, even a question about strategy might mean, hey, we're going to prioritize this area over that area.
Headcount might shift.
What if I'm in that area? Does that mean I'm not important?
What's going to happen to my promotion?
Or I won't get a promotion. I won't get the resources I want because you told everyone in the company that other area is important. And I think one that really does come to mind is, we made this, we've been moving up market. We've been serving larger customers for a long time. And when we first started rolling that out, we were talking about, hey, enterprise is, the focus of the business. And unthinkingly, or communicating to people that weren't in that little group, which was by definition not that big because we were trying to build it.
Yeah.
We told everyone else that their work wasn't important.
And not only that, they had built what allowed the enterprise strategy to even exist in the first place, so they feel ownership.
We're a huge part of the business, and we're what got us here. And so what is, if they're the number one thing, what am I? Was
it as trivial as you and the team forgetting that would be how it's heard? Or is it that, it's that you thought they might understand because they're part of this, they have equity, they have that long term in their head. So of course they're going to understand why we're spending in this area.
I think it's a fundamental, and I think it's a lesson for everyone, is we all live in our own heads. And so in my mind, and from my perspective, what I was saying, had a whole lot of intentionality behind it and a whole lot of reasoning behind it that all made sense to me. But I didn't have the concerns that the people who heard the message had. And I hadn't taken the time to think, and I didn't have the proximity to those people to build the empathy.
And how about the other leaders in your org? Not to have you pin them down or anything right now in this moment, but like obviously,
whose fault was it? No.
Yeah, well, and not their fault, but like it's this moment of, I received this advice once that I feel like falls from a lot of what you're saying, which is when you have these failures of communication, and I've had these big issues too. There needs to be, there wasn't a leader to be the post conversation, the after the all hands, after the strategy meeting, they're the ones having the individual, to your point, question answering, all of that. In that moment, what was lacking, at Greenhouse to have that successfully happen?
Well, again, I don't think it's, it certainly was something I missed, but I think it's just natural to a lot of people. So the folks that are in the room thinking about strategy, first of all, what do they think they're doing? Yeah. They're trying to think of the strategy. Yeah. The communication is like afterwards. Right. And so, we're trying to figure out what's best for the business, and we've got limited resources. Where do we invest, and where's the opportunity, all these things, and you come out with a strategy. And so you're not thinking in the moment about other people and what that may mean for them. That comes later. And so I think it's less about, who didn't have what they needed or do what they were supposed to. It's more about all of us ultimately have learned how to do a better job of kind of thinking about who are all the stakeholders behind and in around this decision that may be impacted by it, and what do they need to hear ahead of time to get bought in, afterwards to have their questions answered. They may have in turn questions that they may hear from, say, their customers.
You weren't thinking that you weren't thinking about them. You were thinking that you actually were thinking about them because of the fundamental decision being.
You got it. And this is where, again, it's like, I would say one very practical thing that I've learned to do is to be incredibly explicit about my intentionality, to say it out loud, which isn't a normal human thing to do. Right. Like, people don't do that at home when they say, my intentionality is to fill my glass, so could you please pass the water? Right? Like, we, in our daily lives, like, we just have, like, we know the people around us, we say things that people expect.
My intentionality is to win this fight with you.
Like, work is different, and as a leader, you have that on you, that you have to be clear about what you're trying to do and what you mean to say. And then you say it as best you can. But if you skip that part, then people often fill in their own interpretation.
I want to, I have an adjacent thing that happened with me that I want to kind of tell you about and hear your thoughts on. It's actually something I still haven't figured out as a founder and CEO. There are these communication issues that, I've had other leaders help me identify at least what it is that's going on. And my executive coach, who I love, who I've worked with for several years. But the implementation on how to fix it has been challenging, other than to not hire as junior, which is not something I love to embrace. It's like, I love people of high aptitude and haven't yet been in this industry. But so there's this thing where even on topics that are really sticky, like a work from home, or let's say it's like how we work, where I would try to be very clear about my intentionality and my earnestness and my explanation as to why I think this is best for us. And I would wind up in these long conversations where I think I'm serving that intentionality. Maybe it's even 2 hours long at the end of the day, maybe 3 hours long. And then those people wound up sometimes feeling like they were the maddest about the decision. And I was like, wait, I acknowledge your points. You heard mine. We're at the end of it. And someone once said to me that, like, actually you gave them a lot of space, but then they didn't see the change that they wanted. Right. And that's really challenging, because I knew I wasn't going to give them the change. And I thought, if I was them, I'd want to give them the space at least to have the conversation. Something in all of that is not right. And I'm curious your thoughts.
I have a thing about that. And I may be hearing you wrong. First of all, can we just talk for a minute? This is amazing fish and chips. Like, super crispy, like spicy, so flaky. This is fantastic.
This is
shatteringly crisp.
Sagaponic, flat iron, 22nd Street.
Fish and chips, I can say.
And the salmon.
Unambiguously.
And I'm going to even go for more while you give me all the mentorship.
So I wanted to get that little plug in. Look, making space for people is a great step. I think one unlock that I've had recently is when there's a decision to be made, it's very important and very helpful to everyone to explain out loud how the decision is going to be made and who's going to make it.
And this is before the process.
Up front.
Right.
And so if I'm hearing you, if we're talking about, you mentioned work from home or any of a million decisions that have to get made, And if I'm like, hey, I really want to hear what you have to say about this, your input's very valuable, and like I want to work on this with you, and you talk for an hour about your preferences, and then I make a different decision, you're like,
did you hear me?
Who's that jerk? Yeah,
Right, right.
like I told him what I needed. He couldn't
Did you even do it against
What was
my
wrong with
wishes?
this person? Yeah, like, does he hate me?
Right.
I had an experience on a team that I'm working with just last week where we were trying to make a decision about a specific sales program, and I asked the team for their input, and I got, this person wants it this way, that person wants it that way, this person wants it the other way. And none of the factors that those people considered were in what I was given. It was just who thinks what.
Right. The result, not the process.
And so my reaction in the moment was, I'm not going to decide based just on this, because what you're telling me is I should think of who I like more or who I trust more or whose opinion I want to favor and others I want to disfavor. And that's the guiding post of this decision. That doesn't sit well with me because exactly what you say, those people are going to walk away thinking, why didn't he like me or why didn't he trust my point of view? And so I asked them to refactor what they were providing me as, here's the pros and cons of option 1, here's the pros and cons of option 2, and here are the factors that you may consider, you might want to think about considering in making this decision, and depersonalizing it. And similarly, what I said was, who's deciding this? And how, and they hadn't asked that question. And so as a result, when this person says, well, I agree with option 1, if I was to go with option 2, like, wait, well, doesn't my vote count? And my thing was like, no, this is not a vote. Right. We have 2 options. They're both good. They both have challenges. I need to pick one. Yep. And so I think explaining to people that like there's someone accountable for the decision and everyone else's job is to give input and advise and ultimately to support the decision.
It's almost like if you go through that preamble first, which I didn't do, even though obviously it's a choice that had to be made for our company and every company. But because I didn't label and because founders might not label, hey, here's who's going to ultimately make the decision. Here are the factors they're considering. Maybe even here's where they're leaning already.
Yeah.
And then there's the input. Yeah. Because I gave them the space.
That's right.
And then in my head, I probably also, even in that room, started to tell them why I wasn't going to go with their choice, even giving them a little bit of that preamble. But if I was clearer on how much inputs were going to matter, to who, then it gets a little bit easier.
Yeah, and so we use this framework. It's called RAPID. We didn't invent it, but it's like a recommender, an approver, which is really a veto. So like legal is often an approver. A perform, so like when the decision is made, who's got to actually do the work, an input, and a decider. And so for small decisions, you just make them. But for a substantial decision, we'll write it out. We'll say, here's the question at hand. Here's the rapid. In other words, here's everyone's role. And then here's how we're going to make that decision. Well, here's the criteria. And when you make that clear, you're like, oh, as an I, like I have input. I have an important role to play. I'm part of the I in that rapid. I'm an input. Or I'm the R. I'm making the recommendation. That's a big job. You've got to do all the analysis. You got to listen to everyone. And then you have to provide the recommendation to the decider in a way that arms that person to make a good decision. Like those are all important jobs. There's one decision maker.
Yeah.
And in a very interesting way, being free, like being clear about whose decision it is, frees all the other people up from worrying about the decision as their, they don't think it's their job.
Right.
And if you don't say all that, then people sometimes assume that their input, maybe we're going to vote on it, or we're going to build consensus, or maybe just the boss is going to decide because, that person's highest up on the totem pole or whatever. And you create a lot of ill will and a lot of miscommunication that way. So that rapid framework has really worked wonders for us at Greenhouse.
I like it. I'm curious now at the stage Greenhouse is at several hundred employees. You guys are obviously still on the mission, but post-product market fit for many, many years now. And what does the communication challenge today feel like? Obviously, it's still probably that internal communication challenge is something you think about, but you've probably gotten pretty good at least thinking about it and making sure you're trying to control inputs. What becomes the growth stage version where a founder in the early might be making mistakes? Where are you now making new mistakes?
Exactly.
If you don't mind sharing.
Pretty much everywhere you look. But I mean, when I hear the question, the first thing that comes to my mind is in authenticity. So it's very easy when you're small. A lot of things are hard, but one thing that's really easy is to be authentic.
Right.
So I remember when we were 20 people, we would do a company-wide meeting at the end of the day on Friday where we would all kind of turn to each other and talk about something that someone else had done that you wanted to shout out for.
Right.
And it was just this really nice moment. It was like, oh yeah, everyone goes around, gives a shout out. It was very sweet.
No one's feeling defensive.
No one's trying to do anything other than, make each other feel good before we go home for the weekend. And then we got a little bit bigger and we had a San Francisco office. And so we had to have IT involved and we had to have a microphone we're passing around. And by the way, it's 5:00 on Friday, but it's only 2:00 in San Francisco. They're still working.
Yep.
So they're kind of not fully in it. They're distracted. And this thing that went from this beautiful ritual, we actually called it Feelings Friday because it was so emotional, kind of became a chore. And I was like, this sucks. And so we had to pull it apart and refactor it and think why are we even doing this in the first place? And how do we re-engineer it for the scale we're at now? And so that's a constant renewal process. And so,
the thing that really stands out to me about that, I think it would be great if founders received the advice that you do have to reinvent your communication style through the phase changes. I think people find it out. But to your point, it's what's authentic for me? If I'm staying in the seat, because some CEOs say, I want to get the professional CEO or my co-founder should take over.
always happens.
And then if you're not going to be that CEO, really intentionally going, okay, there's a different, yes, your job changes and people know that. Founders' jobs change as companies grow, but there's also a different version of being authentic where you have to construct your meetings differently. You have to decide, okay, if you were that person who fundamentally could hop into a room at any time when an employee had a concern when you were a Series A company, that might be a bad idea for a variety of reasons, optics, the unpreparedness, whatever else it might be at the Series E. And if you're not consciously thinking about it, those transitions are going to be rough.
And authentic doesn't mean unprepared.
Right.
And authentic doesn't mean random.
Right.
And so there's always this balance between saying what's really on your mind and saying it in a way that people can hear.
Yeah.
And putting others in a bad position. And you have to always be aware of those two ends. One of the basic things that I try to do is just literally the words you use. For example, corporations love to say we. You get an email from HR and it says, we're excited to roll out this new program, or we've decided that this is the new strategy. And it's wait, who did that? It's no, we didn't do that. You did that.
Right.
And so I always try to advocate no, I.
Yeah.
So, hi, I'm the program manager. I'm excited to roll out this project to the company.
Here's the decision I made, but
You're a
here's
person.
what we are doing.
You got it. Hey,
afterwards.
there's a we in there for sure.
Yeah.
But, just I think there's a, I don't even know if it's a desire. I think it's kind of one of those weird things that people kind of learn at work and they don't know why. And it just sort of happens. And so everybody does it.
To abstractify.
That nobody's trying to do
Yeah.
of hiding behind sort of corporate speak.
Right.
I think the other is jargon.
Right.
I think, it's very easy to get out of a conversation without any risk by just throwing a bunch of jargon in there. And then everyone kind of is oh, that person sounded businessy.
Deep.
Yeah. Well, it just sounded like business. It sounded like it had the format of an answer. So you kind of accept it. And then they walk away and they're wait, what did that person actually say?
Which probably you can use as a heuristic would be can multiple meanings come out of what you said? And if that's true, then you probably didn't say something with enough clarity.
Right. Companies are great at using, difficult vocabulary to hide the reality. Hey, we're issuing some bonds. We're not going into debt. We're not borrowing money. We're issuing bonds. That sounds like you're making something. That's great. Well, we issue new products. That's awesome.
Yep.
You're issuing a bond. You're borrowing money.
Yep.
So again,
Did you raise equity or debt?
Right. And so I think if you find yourself in a position of leadership and you're communicating to a group of people, remembering to try to speak like a human being and avoiding the great temptation. And I say this out of, again, total empathy is a hard position to be in, but pushing yourself to try to stay human and use real words, I think makes your ideas much easier to receive.
Yeah. Yeah. And scale to more people, because at the end of the day, what might become natural to you in your early team is actually not natural. And you find that out over time.
I mean, how many times have you been on customer service line and they say, we appreciate your patience. We value your service. And you're like, if you valued my service so much, you'd answer the phone.
Right. I love it.
It's one of those jargon things that every company says, but like, it doesn't really help.
Yeah. Wow. What a course 2. I think let's finish our food and then go to course 3.
Can't wait.
All right. Okay. Daniel.
Spicy.
Delicious, right?
So good.
Sagaponic, Flatiron, Manhattan.
Highly recommend.
Highly recommend. We have for our 3rd course some good conversation come up. We're going to get Sagaponic dessert to go.
Can't wait.
Give the staff a little bit of a break. They've been great to us here,
Amazing.
by the way. For segment 3, 3-course founders, 3rd course is about questions that come from conversation I have with founder friends of yours. Okay. So you were kind enough to introduce me to some of your closest founder friends who then answered some of my questions. And I want to use their questions to ask you questions. Are you ready?
I don't know. I know my friends pretty well, so I'm nervous because they're the type of people that will definitely try to put me on the spot. So we'll see what happens.
They were generally kind to you.
Good. All right.
Okay. So one of the things that Greg had to say about you, Greg being the founder of Tomo.
Exactly.
You have the ability to see right into people's truths. It's something I asked about, like, what are the traits that are unique to this founder? And the best part about this line is it can be a bit irritating, like eating kale, but so good for you. So, Greg says that about you seeing people's truths. You're like the kale of truth seeking.
Yes.
That should be your LinkedIn headline, by the way, from now on.
Well, friends like that, who needs enemies, right? Okay. All right. I've been
it
called
matches
kale.
the greenhouse branding.
Okay.
I think he's actually being very thoughtful.
I'll take the positive. All right.
What do you think he's talking about?
I feel like I'm being put on the spot because like my superpower supposedly is to understand what you're saying right now at all times. I think I try to actually listen to people. I mean, it sounds so simple, but I think a lot of people often listen so that way they can tell when the other person stops talking so they can say their thing.
Yep.
And one of the things I've tried really hard to do is actually listen to what the person's trying to say. And be a very active listener. If I don't understand, I'll say something. And I don't think everyone does that. So that's part of what I try to do. And then the second piece of it is I've developed some comfort with saying stuff that needs to be said.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other piece of it is once you hear the thing is like, I have this feeling that if I don't say something to you that I think you need to hear, I'm kind of doing you a disservice.
100%.
And so I'm going to honor you by saying that, even if it's not something that may feel comfortable or that may not be positive.
Oftentimes true in the founder scenario. It feels like the pinch back is going to be worse than the value, but it's never, almost never true.
That's right. And so like, I do try to think about like, oh, what is this person really saying? And then like, hey, I heard you. I don't think that's really that way. I think it's this way.
Right.
And I'm willing to say it. I'm willing to be wrong. I'm often, supposing.
Right.
But I want to put my position out there so that way you have the benefit of it.
That's actually, I was going to ask about like how you might reflect people back to them, like positing what you heard before you might get into the kale part. You're like, okay, let's first make sure we're on the same. Because I think that's the thing about, if I might say so, I've been told I'm a good listener too. So maybe we share that and we have good conversations. So I feel you're a good listener.
Working.
Yeah, exactly. And when people ask me about it, I go, I think it's because I am actively trying to like edit, almost chisel down what I hear someone saying over time. And like, I like the principle of either charity or generosity. It's like interpret the best version of someone's argument. Yep. I love to like actually be able to say that I understood even more than what they were saying. But if you had to think about like if someone is a founder wanting to be a good listener, how do they build that muscle? Because it is a muscle, right? So like you're not going to take someone 0 to 100.
It's a skill. And it's like people, I think of these things as like, oh, you're a good listener or you're not a good listener. I would rather think of it as you are good at listening because then it's a skill. Like, are you good at painting or playing basketball? You can practice.
You might be good or bad at different contexts too, right? It's Absolutely. Like, in an intense conversation, some people are worse or better than they are during normal conversation.
You got it. So to me, these are skills. And like any skill, you work on it and you get better. And so I've had a lot of opportunity to practice these things. I've had a lot of instruction and coaching because in order to do my job, these are skills I need.
Yeah.
So I have invested in learning how to do some of these things. So you asked a question, for example, I would say one tool that I've been given that I use a lot is you said I heard, right? So when someone tells you something, reflect back to that person what you think they said. So, hey, you said, I think the strategy is X. What I heard was you don't think Y is important.
Yep.
Is that what you meant to say? Oh, no. I wasn't saying that at all. I think Y is critically important. Whatever, right? And so the whole thing is getting what's in your head out.
We're both chiseling.
And trying to see what's in the other person's head. And that's where the conversation actually happens.
I love that. And I would just add on top for people thinking about it, when you're giving people the opportunity to edit, for example, when you're repeating what they heard. I even tell candidates to do this when they're talking to companies. Don't just ask a question, posit something about their strategy, their go-to-market, and say, hey, here's what I'm assuming based on your stage, based on the recent partnership, based on the fundraising you're building next. Am I right about that? Yeah. And the ability for someone to edit is actually much easier for them to communicate themselves without the opportunity to modify something you've already said.
100%. 100%. But what I like what you did there was you said on the front end, here's what I'm assuming. Yep. And on the back end, do I have that right? Or is there anything you change? And then the stuff you say in the middle, it's much easier to hear. If I just said, what your strategy is, well, don't mansplain to me. I work here.
Yeah.
So, but by positing in the beginning as this is what's in my head. Here's what I'm assuming. And then at the end, putting it out here and say, is that what you're seeing as well? Are you seeing something different? Help me see if things from your perspective.
An invitation.
That's an invitation. Yeah. And so that's how you get into that shared space.
Love that. All right. Back to Greg. I asked what reality TV show you should be on.
Oh boy.
I actually don't know this one, so I hope you do so that you can also tell me not only why he picked it, but what the context should be. He said, well, of course, Naked and Afraid.
Okay.
Do we know Naked and Afraid, or are we both?
I know of it.
Okay.
I haven't seen, so a little thing about me is I'm horrible at pop culture. I actually don't have a TV in my apartment. I'm not on social media. So there's a lot of references that I don't get. I actually know what that is.
Okay, so you might know the implication that he's making in that.
There could be a lot of implications. Again, I can't speak to what's
could be literal.
I can't speak to what's in Greg's head. I can only speak to, he said Naked and Afraid. What I heard.
Yeah. Ooh, good. Love that.
Well, I don't know what he meant by that.
Yeah.
I would definitely going to ask him, but I can say what I appreciate about that, which is I am a huge outdoors person. I love camping and I do I truly go in the wilderness when I go on my vacations. And so I am very comfortable. In fact, I'm the most comfortable in the whole world when I wake up on a rock in the middle of a lake, a 3-day paddle from the nearest phone line, staring at the stars. That
uncertainty,
is my happy place. And so
lack of obligation.
I'm usually wearing clothes and I'm usually got my faculties about me, but in spirit, being off in the wilderness, I think is something that I enjoy.
He had a second line, which is actually going to be specific and not what you said, but I actually think they tie together. Okay. That's the show. Every successful startup founder is actually living at work every day. So it's very literal.
Fair.
But I will say this whole you being comfortable in the outdoor scenario you just described, founders with ambiguity, with I have to set my own direction, with I don't know exactly what's around me and it might take me a bit to 3-day paddle.
Yep.
Do you tie that trait of yours and that hobby of yours?
Now we're getting somewhere because the truth is, very much. Yeah. I learned a lot of these skills as a young kid. Yeah. I went to a summer camp in northern Wisconsin called Camp Nebagaman, Lake Nebagaman, Wisconsin, 54849. And we went on outdoor wilderness trips in the Boundary Waters, which is a vast area of wilderness on the Canadian border. And you learn a lot about yourself. You learn about self-reliance. You learn about interdependence and independence because you're part of a group. You learn as you get older how to develop some leadership skills and to grapple with adversity and the unknown. And you don't think of it at the time as that. You think I'm going on a canoe trip. But I can tell you very much that much of who I am today as a person and as a leader comes from those early experiences where you have no choice. It's just you all.
Yeah.
It's you and a handful of kids and a couple of counselors figuring it out.
Moments where early in life you need that self-reliance, and self-reliance doesn't necessarily mean as an individual, also a group, but without the same support structure. Yeah. I think are real builders of founders, to be honest. It seems like there's a story every time. All right, back to the list. This one's going to get a little bit interesting. This is your co-founder.
Okay.
And it's interesting because I think it's something that founders don't love to talk about. That you made some bold decisions early in the company around firing high-performing employees who had bad behavior, and this was a painful process. but that you were setting a tone for a culture.
Yeah.
Let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah.
What does that bring up for you?
Well, look, I mean, results matter. Don't get me wrong. But behavior matters as well. And I think, I've heard it defined as culture is the worst behavior that you'll tolerate.
Right. Yeah. That felt, when I heard that the first time,
right?
It made so much sense.
And so in my way of thinking, in the early days, I mean, this moment that he's discussing, we were probably no more than a dozen people in the company, maybe less than 20. The things you choose to do then will set the culture for forever.
Yeah.
Because those people become leaders and hire other people, and that foundation goes on. And so in those days, it was as important to me to make sure that we were on the right path to where we're trying to go as the given results in a certain day or month or quarter. Those matter. But if you're not getting where you're trying to go, then it's not going to help. And I just felt, this person, maybe they sold a bunch of stuff or they shipped a bunch of features or whatever their job was. But if they're not upholding the values that we claim, then we really don't have a claim to those values. Then what are we? And anything goes. And at that point, it gets impossible to build a cohesive team that can work together to solve bigger challenges. And so to me, it was a difficult conversation. I mean, it's an emotionally laden moment, but it's a very easy decision.
I've struggled with that a lot. I've kept people for a long time, tried to fix that. All sorts of things you get into your head as a founder. Yeah. For someone who hasn't figured that out yet, right? Like it sounds like you developed that conviction, the courage of your convictions pretty early when you saw, I don't want to set this foundation. When someone doesn't have that, what do you, either do you have a solution or a piece of advice, or B, do you have a diagnosis as to what's wrong with that founder? Not fundamentally wrong, but like, what do you think is going on?
That's the issue.
Yeah.
Again, look, I'll start by saying this. I have a lot of empathy, and I've been in that position myself. Like, it is not unusual, and it doesn't mean you're bad. It's very natural to worry about having difficult conversations or to worry about getting rid of someone from your organization.
A potential loss opportunity if you're wrong.
For any reason. I mean, those things are always hard to do and should be done with some care. If you're not afraid to fire someone from their job, like maybe that's its own problem. That should be something that you think about and worry about. And there's a lot of pressure if you're, a leader to hit those results. And that's a lot of what you're held accountable to. And so if you're going to make the decision to say, move on from someone, even though they're producing those results, it can put you in a really difficult spot.
Yeah.
Because after all, maybe it's your investors, maybe it's other employees, maybe it's other stakeholders that may say, wait a sec, why'd you fail? Yeah. And the answer might be, well, I had this person and they were doing it, and now
you have to think about everybody. You have to think of everybody.
What I would say to you, if you're a founder in that position, as hard as this may be to feel in the moment, is you're usually the last person to find out, and you're usually the one who knows the least. And so the things you're worried about, what are those people going to think? Mostly what they're going to think is what took you so long.
Mm-hmm. That's always been true. When it finally resolves, it's always been true.
And so you sit there and go like, oh, I'm going to get rid of this leader, but then their team is going to be adrift and worried. You're like, no, the team is adrift and worried because of that leader. And as soon as you do it, they're going to be like, you dork, like, why didn't you do this 6 months ago?
And there might be other homework you need to do, but net.
That's right. So overwhelmingly, I'm not saying every time, but overwhelmingly, that's the situation. And it can just be really hard to see it. And again, you're feeling all kinds of different things. So I don't blame people necessarily, but it's a helpful thought exercise to do.
Yeah, 100%. Love it. Okay, back to the list. You're said to have a great gift for compartmentalization. Juggling board issues, employee issues, a customer escalation, but being able to be present in each thing. Oh, and dealing with your kid.
Yes.
So, family is part of this too. And you don't get overwhelmed by it. How? How is the question, by the way, that I was told to ask as the thing there. So it's such the question at the end of that ramble of you being able to compartmentalize.
I wish I had. That's one. I agree. It's definitely a skill that I've worked on. Again, it is inherent in the job because, well, first of all, like everyone, there's a lot going on in my life. There's a lot going on in everyone's life. Everyone knows stuff out of work and stuff inside of work. But I also have a job that involves a ton of tasks switching or context switching very quickly. So I show up in a meeting, and for this 20 minutes, this is who I'm with. And it might be the most important meeting they have all day. And for me, it's just like my 11:30.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I don't show up in that moment for that person, it matters, and they notice it, and it has a real impact. So that's the first thing I'll say is it's really important to be able to figure out how to do that. And it's a very and we're all subject to these. And so, like so many things, I think it starts with intentionality. It starts with asking yourself the question, how do I want to be in this meeting? How do I want to be in this event or in this context? And then, hey, for me, it's important that I show up in this meeting and really listen. For me, it's important that I project confidence. For in this meeting, it's important that I speak clearly, like whatever those things are. And just spending 30 seconds or a minute thinking about that question, actually, you can get pretty far. And you think 30 seconds is a long time. Like set your stopwatch right now and think for 30 seconds, you can get somewhere. And just taking that moment or taking that beat before you hit go on the next Zoom to be like, who am I meeting with? What is it for? What do I want to do? What are my goals? How do I get there? Okay, this is how I should be. All right, hit the button.
What I like about that is because it also includes, here's what either actively or not, here's what I'm not bringing from the last one.
You got it.
Yeah.
You got it. And
yeah.
they weren't in that, and so.
They don't care. They don't know.
There's that. And then it's very generous that he said, I'm very good at compartmentalizing. I appreciate that. It's very kind. The truth is, whatever my break, everyone has a breaking point. Everyone has a limit. And, I happen to be in a moment right now where I kind of hit a limit recently. We had executive depart. And so I'm kind of filling in for that other person. So I'm kind of doing a couple of jobs right now. And so my time available is not sufficient to do all the work. And so the other piece of it is be intentional when that happens, of communicating that to people who, again, they're not thinking, my dad always told me when I was growing up, most people are spending their time not thinking about you.
Yep.
Right. And so most people aren't thinking about me most of the time, as it should be. And so you got to tell them.
Yeah.
So I literally started telling people, number one, I just took on this other role. It's another big job. I don't have time to do both. And so your time is valuable. You're important to me. I know we have a weekly one-on-one. I'm cutting it down to 15 minutes.
Yep.
Or I'm taking it off the calendar for the moment. It's not because you're not important. Yep. It's because I only have a certain amount of time. Because I still value hearing from you, what I would ask is, if there's something I need to know, please send it to me in Slack.
Right.
And if we need to hop on a call, we can find time to do that. So that may be obvious to you. It's not obvious to them.
I'll just add one thing to that. I love that. And, the version of that communication I've sometimes done with clients in the past in a, kind of when they're in a service-based relationship and they have an expectation, and I know I'm struggling to compartmentalize, and I'm like, okay, I'm stressed because my calendar squeeze is happening right now, but they sent me a question. I have two choices. Punt so that they don't get an answer for a day, and then I owe them a lot. Yeah. And then suddenly that issue bleeds. Or say, you're getting a short version of this answer right now because I'm schedule squeezed. Here's the thing. Yeah. I'll come back to you and let's talk about it later.
Exactly. People, that's a great way to solve the conundrum. It's a math problem. I don't have so many hours. I'm doing something right now. But hey, I heard you. You don't stress. Yeah. As a very empathetic type of response. So kudos to you.
Listen, I think it's been a fantastic conversation where I'm going to steal a lot of the things I'm going to give you kudos for, because there are very few people who in this HR tech world have been able to build. There's so many attempts at ATS. There's so many attempts at going to the enterprise. There's so many attempts at trying to tell recruiters and talent makers, as you call them, CEOs and leaders, how to change things. And, as a wrap here, I recommend everybody think about a lot of the themes here have been about, as a CEO, you have clearly at different points intentionally thought about how to change. And throughout all of those instances, there might be transition periods, but it sounds like every single time, the thing that probably a lot of people around you would give you credit for is you're taking the transition seriously.
You have to. A startup is, by my definition of a startup, is an organization that needs to change or it will fail. And so that's my job.
That's a great new definition of startups. Love it. Daniel, great conversation. Great three courses.
This was great. Let's go have our dessert.
Let's do it.
That went from real authentic, super helpful, you're getting the real story, to unprepared, unprofessional, kind of rambly, a little risky, and pretty much a bad experience for everyone.